Roy Orbison was sitting in a makeup chair, staring at himself in the mirror. Behind him, a makeup artist was dabbing powder on his forehead. Around him, the controlled chaos of a major television production, crew members shouting instructions, cameras being repositioned, lighting technicians making final adjustments. Roy's hands were trembling slightly. Not from nerves about the performance. Roy had performed thousands of times. This was something else. A young man in his 30s approached, clipboard in hand. Michael Appleton, the director. He had the confident swagger of someone who'd produced dozens of successful TV specials and thought he knew how things worked. "Roy, you're looking fantastic. We're almost ready for the final song. Crying. It's going to be the centerpiece of the special." Roy nodded. "What's the setup?" Appleton smiled. "We're going with a close-up. Really intimate. Just you, the microphone, and the camera. No distractions." Roy's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Appleton continued, excited. "And for this final number, we'd like to try something different, something really emotional." Roy had a bad feeling about where this was going. Appleton said it casually, like it was no big deal. "We'd like you to remove your sunglasses, just for this one song. The audience needs to see your eyes, Roy. That's where the emotion lives." Roy's voice was flat. "No." Appleton blinked. "I'm sorry?" Roy stood up from the makeup chair. "I don't perform without my sunglasses." What happened in the next 12 minutes would end the production, destroy a £250,000 investment, and protect a secret Roy Orbison had been hiding for 40 years. This is the story of why Roy Orbison walked off the biggest television special of his career. The story of a medical condition he'd concealed since childhood. The story of a 15-second moment that would have destroyed everything Roy had built. And the story of a man who chose dignity over fame, silence over explanation, and walked away from a fortune rather than let the world see what he'd been hiding behind those black sunglasses. To understand what happened at the BBC in 1972, you need to understand what Roy Orbison's eyes looked like without the sunglasses. Roy had been born with amblyopia in his left eye, a condition commonly known as lazy eye. The medical term sounds clinical, but the reality was devastating for a child growing up in 1940s Texas. Roy's left eye couldn't focus properly. The brain hadn't fully connected to the eye during early development, which meant the eye wandered. When Roy was tired, stressed, or under bright lights, his left eye would drift outward, sometimes dramatically. Roy could see out of his left eye, barely. Just shapes and light, no detail. Everything Roy saw, he saw with his right eye. His brain had learned to ignore the input from the left eye entirely. This made Roy's depth perception terrible. He couldn't judge distances well. He'd bump into things, miss steps, struggle with anything requiring binocular vision. But the worst part wasn't the vision problem. It was how it looked. When Roy's left eye drifted, he looked wrong, asymmetrical. In the cruel vocabulary of childhood bullies, cross-eyed, broken, freakish. Roy had been tormented as a child. Kids would stare at his left eye and laugh. They'd make crossed-eye faces at him. They'd ask him which person he was looking at in a group. By the time Roy was 10 years old, he'd developed coping mechanisms. He'd tilt his head slightly to the right, positioning his good eye forward. He'd avoid direct eye contact. He'd position himself so people saw his right side more than his left. When Roy started wearing glasses in his teenage years, he chose frames with thick black rims, anything to draw attention away from the eyes themselves and toward the frames. But the real solution came in 1963, when Roy accidentally left his prescription glasses on an airplane and had to wear prescription sunglasses on stage. The dark lenses changed everything. Nobody could see his eyes, nobody could see the drift, nobody could see the imperfection. The sunglasses became Roy's armor, his shield, his mask, and he never took them off in public again. By 1972, the sunglasses had become so synonymous with Roy Orbison that most people didn't even question them anymore. They were part of his image, his brand, his mystique. But Roy knew the truth. The sunglasses weren't a fashion choice. They were a necessity. They were the only thing standing between Roy Orbison, the legend, and Roy Kelton Orbison, the man with the wandering eye. The BBC television special in April 1972 was supposed to be Roy's triumphant return to British television. He'd had a rough few years: Claudette's death in 1966, the house fire that killed his sons in 1968. But Roy was trying to rebuild. New album, new tour, new opportunities. The BBC offered him a primetime special, a full hour, complete creative control, or so Roy thought. The taping was scheduled for April 17th. Roy arrived at BBC Television Centre in West London around 2 p.m. for a 4 p.m. taping. The studio was massive, with 3 cameras, a 40-piece orchestra, and a crew of about 80 people. Roy went through hair and makeup, got fitted with his microphone, did a sound check. Everything was professional, smooth. The running order was simple. Roy would perform 5 songs, Only the Lonely, In Dreams, Blue Bayou, Oh Pretty Woman, and closing with Crying. They taped the first 4 songs without incident. Roy was in good voice. The orchestra sounded beautiful. The cameras captured everything perfectly. Then came time for Crying. Director Michael Appleton called for a 5-minute break before the final song. Roy went to his dressing room to rest his voice. He drank some water, sat quietly, prepared himself for the emotional finale. A production assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Orbison, we're ready for you." Roy walked back to the studio floor, but something had changed. The lighting setup was different. 2 of the cameras had been moved closer, and there was a single spotlight positioned directly in front of where Roy would stand, brighter and hotter than anything they'd used so far. Roy approached Appleton. "What's with the new lighting?" Appleton smiled. "We're doing something special for this last number, an extreme close-up, really intimate. The audience is going to feel like they're 2 feet away from you." Roy felt his stomach tighten. "How close?" Appleton gestured to one of the cameras. "We're going to fill the entire screen with your face. Every emotion, every tear, every tiny movement. It's going to be stunning." Roy looked at the spotlight. It was the kind of light used for extreme close-ups, harsh, bright, unforgiving, the kind of light that revealed every detail. And Roy knew, under that kind of light, his left eye would drift, badly. "Michael, I don't think that's a good idea." Appleton was already walking away. "Trust me, Roy. This is going to be the best part of the special." Roy stood there, looking at the spotlight, feeling panic rising in his chest. He couldn't do this. Not with that light. Not with that camera angle. But how could he explain? How could he tell Michael Appleton that he couldn't do an extreme close-up without revealing the secret he'd hidden for 10 years? Roy made a decision. He'd just perform the song. Keep his head angled right. Keep the sunglasses on. Maybe the camera wouldn't catch it. The production assistant called out, "Quiet on set. We're rolling in 30 seconds. Roy took his position in front of the microphone. The orchestra raised their instruments. The spotlight clicked on, and Roy immediately felt the heat. The light was so bright, he could feel it through his sunglasses. Appleton's voice came through the studio speakers. "All right, Roy, before we start, one quick thing." Roy looked up at the director's booth. Appleton continued, "For this shot, we'd like you to remove your sunglasses. The close-up won't work with them on. The audience needs to see your eyes." Roy's blood went cold. "No," Roy said. There was a pause. Then Appleton's voice confused. "I'm sorry?" "I said no, I don't perform without my sunglasses." Appleton came down from the booth and walked onto the studio floor. The crew watched, sensing tension. "Roy, this is the climax of the special. This is the moment everyone's been waiting for. We need to see your face. Your real face." Roy's voice was calm but firm. "The sunglasses stay on." Appleton tried a different approach. "Roy, I understand the sunglasses are part of your image, but this is television. People watch TV to see people. Real, unfiltered emotion. The sunglasses create a barrier." "The sunglasses stay on." Appleton's frustration was showing now. "Roy, the BBC is paying a lot of money for this special. We've invested in you. We're trying to make you look good." Roy took a step toward Appleton. "I look good with the sunglasses." Appleton made his fatal mistake. He reached toward Roy's face, as if to demonstrate something about the lighting angle. Roy's hand shot up and grabbed Appleton's wrist, hard. "Don't touch the glasses!" The entire studio went silent. 80 people stopped moving. The orchestra members looked at each other. Camera operators stepped back from their equipment. Appleton pulled his wrist free, his face red. "Roy, I'm just trying to—" No! Roy cut him off. "You're trying to make me do something I've told you I won't do. And if you ask me one more time, I'm walking out of here." Appleton, ego bruised and embarrassed in front of his entire crew, made another mistake. "Roy, if you won't work with us, then maybe we need to reconsider this entire special." Roy stared at Appleton for a long moment. Then he reached up and removed his microphone pack. He set it carefully on the floor. "Consider it reconsidered." And Roy Orbison walked off the set. The studio erupted. The producer ran after Roy. Production assistants scrambled. Appleton stood there, stunned, as the most important production of his career imploded around him. Roy walked through the hallways of BBC Television Center, past frantic staff members trying to stop him, past security guards who didn't know if they should intervene, straight to his dressing room. His road manager, a man named Bill Dees, was waiting there. "Roy, what happened? They're saying you walked off." Roy started packing his bag. "We're leaving." "Roy, you can't just—" "Watch me." Bill had worked with Roy long enough to know when not to push. "Okay, let me call the car." Within 20 minutes, Roy Orbison was in a car heading to his hotel. Within 3 hours, he was on a plane back to the United States. The BBC scrambled. They tried to salvage the special by editing together the first 4 songs, but without the emotional finale of crying, it didn't work. The special was scrapped. The BBC lost approximately £180,000, about $450,000 at the time, roughly $3 million in today's money. Michael Appleton's career took a hit. He was blamed for mishandling the talent, for being inflexible, for losing the BBC's investment. But here's what nobody at the BBC understood. Roy Orbison didn't walk off that set because he was a diva. He didn't walk off because he was difficult or unprofessional. Roy walked off because he was protecting a secret that would have destroyed his career if it came out. In 1972, television was unforgiving. Stars were supposed to be perfect. Any physical imperfection, any deviation from the idealized image could end a career. If millions of British viewers had watched Roy Orbison's left eye drift during an extreme close-up of crying, if they'd seen his eye wander off center while he sang, the gossip would have been immediate and brutal. Did you see Roy Orbison's eye? Something's wrong with him. He looks cross-eyed without the sunglasses. Why does his eye do that? Is he drunk? Roy knew this. He'd lived with this condition his entire life. He'd been mocked as a child. He'd learned to hide it as an adult, and he wasn't going to let one television director expose him to millions of people. So he walked. He gave up the money, the exposure, the opportunity. He walked away from one of the biggest productions of his career, because dignity was more valuable than fame. After Roy returned to the United States, the BBC sent threatening letters about breach of contract. Roy's management negotiated a settlement. Roy agreed to forfeit his fee for the special, which partially compensated the BBC for their losses. But Roy never explained publicly why he'd walked off. When journalists asked, he gave a simple answer. Creative differences. It wasn't the right fit. Reporters pressed for more details. Roy stonewalled. I don't work without my sunglasses. That's non-negotiable. The BBC wanted something different. We couldn't agree. End of story. The incident became a footnote in Roy's career, the time he walked off a BBC special for mysterious reasons. Most biographies mention it briefly, usually framing it as Roy being stubborn or protective of his image. But Roy's close friends knew the real reason. In 1985, Roy told his wife Barbara about the incident. They were watching television one night when a commercial came on featuring a close-up of a singer's face. Roy gestured at the screen. See how they light that? That's the kind of close-up the BBC wanted. That's the kind of shot that would have ended my career. Barbara was confused. What do you mean? Roy hesitated. He'd never talked about this with anyone except his childhood doctor and his first wife, Claudette. Finally, Roy said, My left eye doesn't work right. It drifts. When I'm tired or stressed, it goes off-center. The sunglasses hide it. But if I'd taken them off under those BBC lights with that close-up camera, millions of people would have seen it. And that would have been it. I'd be the singer with the lazy eye. That's all anyone would remember. Barbara looked at Roy with new understanding. You've been hiding this your whole career? Roy nodded. Since I was a kid. The glasses saved me. Once I started wearing them on stage, nobody could see it. But if I'd let the BBC film me without them, I couldn't risk it. Barbara took Roy's hand. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Roy shrugged. I'm ashamed of it. I know I shouldn't be. It's a medical condition. But when you grow up being called cross-eyed and broken, that shame doesn't go away. I'd rather walk away from $1 million TV special than let people see what's behind the glasses. Barbara pulled Roy close. There's nothing wrong with you. Roy smiled sadly. Tell that to the kids who made fun of me in Texas. Tell that to the producers who think audiences need to see real emotion without sunglasses. Roy Orbison never performed for the BBC again. He continued touring, recording, building his legacy. But he never forgot April 17, 1972. The day he chose privacy over fame. In 1987, during his Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, Bruce Springsteen mentioned Roy's sunglasses in his speech. Roy Orbison is cool. He's mysterious. The sunglasses, they're iconic. They make you wonder what he's thinking, what he's feeling. Backstage after the ceremony, Roy told Bruce a version of the truth, not the full medical history, but a hint. The sunglasses aren't mysterious to me, Bruce. They're necessary. I need them, not for the stage lights, not for the image. I just need them. Bruce nodded, not fully understanding but respecting the boundary. Roy Orbison died on December 6, 1988. He was 52 years old. At the funeral, Roy was buried in his black suit and black sunglasses. Even in death, Roy kept the armor on. After Roy's death, his optometrist released medical records, with the family's permission, confirming what few people had known. Roy Orbison had severe amblyopia in his left eye. His vision in that eye was 20/400, legally blind. And without the sunglasses to hide it, the drift was obvious. Barbara Orbison spoke about the BBC incident in a 2003 interview. People thought Roy was difficult or vain about the sunglasses, but he was protecting himself. He'd been bullied as a child for his eye. He wasn't going to let that happen again as an adult. Walking off that BBC set was one of the bravest things Roy ever did. He gave up a fortune to protect his dignity. In 2015, the BBC released archival footage from the April 1972 session, the 4 songs Roy had completed before walking off. The footage shows Roy in his element, cool, professional, commanding. But if you watch closely during Only the Lonely, there's a brief moment when the camera catches Roy from an angle where his sunglasses don't fully hide his eyes. For just a second, you can see his left eye drift slightly. It's barely noticeable. Most viewers wouldn't catch it, but Roy would have seen it. And Roy knew that under the bright lights of that close-up, without the sunglasses, the drift would have been unmistakable. The story of Roy Orbison walking off the BBC set isn't really about sunglasses or television or money. It's about a man who'd been bullied as a child and spent his entire adult life building armor to protect himself from ever being bullied again. It's about the lengths we go to hide our imperfections, even when those imperfections are beyond our control. It's about choosing dignity over opportunity. Roy Orbison could have taken off the sunglasses. He could have done the close-up. He could have let millions of people see his left eye drift. Maybe some viewers wouldn't have noticed. Maybe some wouldn't have cared. Maybe the performance would have been so powerful that his eye condition wouldn't have mattered. But Roy couldn't take that risk, because he'd lived with the shame and mockery long enough to know that people remember imperfections more than they remember talent. So Roy walked. He gave up the BBC special, the money, the exposure. He gave up the chance to reach millions of British viewers, and he kept his secret for 16 more years, until he took it to the grave. The black sunglasses weren't just an image. They were survival. And on April 17th, 1972, Roy Orbison chose survival over stardom. That's not vanity. That's not being difficult. That's courage.